A League of Their Own, 1992. Penny Marshall, Tom Hanks, Geena Davis. A women's baseball league from World War II that most of America had never heard of, and after this film, never forgot. The production behind it was considerably messier than the finished film suggests. 4 different actresses occupied the lead role before cameras rolled. The studio that developed it walked away, and the line that everybody quotes was so minor in the original script that it nearly didn't survive the editing room. Today, 15 facts about A League of Their Own, starting with how Penny Marshall stumbled onto a story that history had completely erased, through the injuries the cast absorbed making a feel-good comedy, all the way to the ending that Marshall wrote, filmed to the edge of the camera, and then cut because it went somewhere nobody was ready for. Fact 1. Penny Marshall fell in love with the story watching a documentary alone on television. One evening in 1987, a public television documentary about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League came on. Marshall, who had just directed Big, sat watching with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. Baseball was in her blood, and here was an entire professional women's league that had simply vanished from the national conversation, as though it had never existed. What she didn't know was that producers had already been hunting the rights to this exact story and had her name at the top of their wish list. A chapter of American sporting history so thoroughly erased that a lifelong baseball fan could reach middle age without once having heard of it had come within a breath of staying buried forever. Fact 2. 20th Century Fox developed the project, panicked, and walked away, and Columbia moved in. Fox had put real money into development before deciding the project was too risky and pushing it into turnaround. Marshall had already stepped away to direct Awakenings. The project went cold. Columbia picked it up while it was loose. When Marshall came back ready to work, the film now belonged to a studio she hadn't started with. The company that had developed it and let it go watched a competitor take it to $132 million at the box office. A picture that one studio couldn't commit to became a record breaker for the studio willing to take the chance. Fact 3. Geena Davis was the 4th actress to be cast as Dottie Hinson. Demi Moore was in early conversations before pregnancy removed her. Deborah Winger came next and threw herself into preparation. She trained with the Chicago Cubs and built genuine athletic credibility from scratch. Then, weeks before cameras rolled, Winger left. Her stated reason was the casting of Madonna, which she felt had pulled the project away from the serious film she had signed on to make. She departed with a settlement reportedly worth millions. Davis stepped in, inherited all the friction Winger had described, and delivered the performance that now defines the role. A character that audiences have always associated with one woman very nearly went to several others first. Fact 4. Penny Marshall told Tom Hanks to gain weight so that nobody would find him attractive. Jimmy Dugan needed to read immediately as a man who had comprehensively abandoned himself. Marshall's instruction to Hanks was direct. Put on as much weight as possible and make absolutely certain that nobody on set or in the audience would find him the least bit appealing. Hanks complied without complaint. He softened one of the most naturally charismatic presences of his generation into something bloated and defeated. The studio could have leaned into his warmth. The film needed him to bury it. Fact 5. The characters of Dottie and Kit were based on the screenwriter's own mother and aunt. Kim Wilson and Kelly Candell were writing about their own family. Their mother and aunt had both played in the real league, and the dynamic between a steady, gifted older sister and a volatile, ambitious younger one came directly from what they had grown up watching. The approach was careful. Dottie and Kit were drawn from these real women rather than copied from them. Candell's mother lived to see the film and watched Hollywood turn the league she had given years of her life to into something the country would finally remember. She died only a few months after its release. Fact 6. The film's most quoted line was so minor that it nearly didn't survive to the final cut.
There's no crying in baseball!
Nobody thought "there's no crying in baseball" was going to matter. It was filler, a throwaway beat between more important moments. The writers didn't flag it. The producers didn't protect it. What saved it was an accident of performance. Biddy Schramm, playing the right fielder on the receiving end of Hanks's eruption, began crying on camera without prompting. Her genuine tears gave Hanks the exact opening he needed. He delivered the line with such total conviction that Marshall kept the take precisely as it had occurred. The American Film Institute eventually ranked it among the greatest movie quotes in history. A throwaway beat nobody believed in became the thing most people carry with them from the film. Fact 7. The cast trained 6 days a week for 8 hours a day before a single scene was shot. Real coaches and a dedicated technical advisor ran the company through the fundamentals until the movements stopped looking rehearsed and started looking native. Marshall's requirement was simple. She wanted to almost never need to cut to a body double. For a comedy, the physical demand was extreme. By the time the first day of production arrived, everything the camera captured was genuinely theirs. paid for in months of repetition and bruises before the lights ever came on. Fact 8. The injuries the cast sustained were real, and some lasted for years. The women were doing their own playing, which meant the physical toll was not manufactured. One actress carried a thigh bruise so severe it remained visible years after the production wrapped. Another was struck by a thrown mitt with enough force to break her nose. A third quietly broke a foot during the shoot. Davis has spoken about sliding repeatedly in the period-accurate short skirts, skin scraped raw from the base path, take after take. The ease the camera captures was costing the performers real skin and bone every day. A studio that let it go. A lead role that passed through 4 actresses. A line nobody thought would matter that became one of the most quoted in cinema history. A cast absorbing real injuries to make a feel-good comedy. We're not halfway through. Still coming. The private backstory Tom Hanks built that never appears in the dialogue. The charm school rules that turned out to be accurate. And the bonus about what the ending almost said before Marshall cut it. Fact 9. Tom Hanks built an entire secret history for Jimmy Dugan that exists nowhere in the script. The performance wasn't coming together. Hanks could access the surface bitterness, but kept missing the specific wound underneath, the thing that explained why a man with obvious gifts had chosen to destroy himself so thoroughly. The screenplay didn't supply it, so Hanks invented it. His private invention, Dugan, had shattered his knee not in some heroic moment, but in a stupid, avoidable accident born of bad choices, somewhere he had no business being, late at night, ending a promising career and leaving him with nothing but time and regret. That invented wound gave the whole performance its weight. Virtually none of it surfaces as spoken dialogue. All of it is present in how Hanks holds the character's body and inhabits his silences. Fact 10. The charm school sequences are almost entirely historically accurate. The moments that read as broad period comedy, mandatory chaperones, deportment classes, fines for behavior deemed unladylike, athletes sliding across dirt in regulation skirts, were lifted almost directly from the league's actual rulebook. Real survivors who worked as consultants confirmed that, if anything, the film had softened the reality. The uniform skirts that caused genuine skin damage on the base paths were an enforced policy maintained, despite the obvious physical cost. The whole regime existed because the league was marketing women playing a hard, traditionally male sport to a wartime public that might otherwise reject it. Extreme femininity was the price of admission. Fact 11. The film contains a brief, silent acknowledgement of the sport's racial exclusion. A ball rolls loose toward the fence and comes to rest near a black woman standing on the other side. She picks it up, holds it a moment, then fires it back with such precision and velocity that everyone on the field stops. The moment is wordless. Hans Zimmer's score carries it without dialogue. The scene acknowledges what the film otherwise largely leaves alone. The league was segregated. Black women with the talent to play were kept outside the fence by the same logic that drew the color line across baseball as a whole. The woman with the extraordinary throw stands on the wrong side of the barrier for no reason the film is willing to defend. She returns the ball. The scene continues. Fact 12. The closing reunion was populated almost entirely by real survivors of the actual league. When it came time to film the Baseball Hall of Fame sequence, the production filled it almost entirely with genuine surviving veterans rather than extras. The women whose careers the film had been reconstructing were assembled to watch their own erased history placed formally into the record. One of them, a former pitcher from the actual league, delivers the moment's most significant line, calling Davis's character simply the best player in the league. No ceremony, no build-up. The real women and the invented characters existed in the same frame. Marshall gave the scene back to the people it had always been about. Fact 13. CBS launched a television series based on the film in 1993 and canceled it almost immediately. Marshall directed the pilot herself. Several film cast members returned. The network put it on the air and watched the ratings fail to develop. It was canceled after only a handful of episodes, never finding the audience that had shown up reliably for the original. Not even an episode directed by Hanks could generate the momentum the show needed. The film endured for decades. The television adaptation is now almost entirely forgotten. Fact 14. The fictional candy magnate who funds the league was drawn directly from a real figure. Gary Marshall plays Walter Harvey, a confectionery tycoon who bankrolls the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League to keep his empty ballparks generating revenue while the men are at war. The character is a lightly disguised version of Philip K. Wrigley, the chewing gum magnate and Cubs owner who helped establish the real league for precisely the same self-interested reasons. The tryout sequences were filmed at Wrigley Field, the stadium bearing the name of the family that Harvey was modeled on. The warm-hearted comedy rests on a foundation of institutional self-interest that the film treats more gently than the history strictly requires. Fact 15. A League of Their Own was the first film directed by a woman to cross $100 million domestically. The final domestic total exceeded $100 million. Critics had largely described the film as pleasant and modest in its ambitions. The audience disagreed about the modest part, and word of mouth built the film's performance across its run rather than front-loading it in the opening weekend. A barrier fell while the audience inside was simply enjoying themselves. The Library of Congress eventually added it to the National Film Registry. A comedy about women playing baseball in 1943 was placed alongside the formally recognized classics of American cinema. And now, the bonus I've been saving for last. The ending that exists, the two sisters holding each other without speaking, the question hanging permanently unanswered, was not the only version that was written. An earlier draft pushed the final scene into explicit confrontation. Kit asks Dottie directly whether she dropped the ball at the plate on purpose. She names it. She needs to know whether Dottie, who was the stronger player by almost any measure, deliberately let her win the championship, handed her the biggest moment of her life as a gift rather than as something earned. Saying it aloud would have changed everything. It would have converted a farewell that is tender and ambiguous into something that feels more like a reckoning. It would have taken from the two sisters the one thing the finished film grants them, a quiet space where the rivalry that defined them is finally allowed to rest. Marshall judged it too dark and cut it before filming. What survives is an embrace. 2 words from one sister, 2 from the other. No answer to the question at the center of the whole story, because the question is left to whoever is watching to fill with whatever version of family and competition and love they carry in from their own lives. The film is more beloved today because it refused to tell you, and it almost didn't.